Okay. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to this. Is it not on? Yeah. This session on the critique on child protection and children's rights. As you can see, we have quite a full panel also today, but I'm sure we will have time for everyone. Okay. So in Norway, there has been an immense media coverage of child protection practice over the last years, scrutinizing both practice and decisions. In addition, social media has been playing an increasingly important role in the public critique of child protection, mobilizing across societies. The Norwegian Facebook group, Barnevernet vil vi ha fullstendig fjernet, we want the child protection system removed entirely, has over 18,000 members as of August 2018. This media attention has exposed child protection decision makers to threats and enormous pressure. And social groupings are frequently setting forward claims of a system in crisis and that needs to be reformed. There is a need for public scrutiny of state institutions in democratic societies, but it also raises many questions and creates many challenges, and then particularly in this field. As whose voices are we actually hearing, and whom is it potentially hurting? What are the implications of this kind of public scrutiny? And how can we handle it while at the same time not compromising with accountability and transparency? I just quickly have some photos. I'm just going to get them up. Jeg får ikke det helt til. Sånt. Nei, men han ikke her lenger. Nei, ikke. Der nede. Så har du. Okay. Wow, well done. So just quickly some pictures to illustrate some of the situation that we had in Norway. The first one is a large bekymringsmelding, like a report of concern from a group of professionals. And the other one is quite current, a documentary from the BBC. Here is also a response to this documentary and this article from BBC, from a psychologist who lives in Norway, but he is British. And here are some of the consequences of this. We have the large, what's it called? Demonstrations against child protection, and some from Britain we could see underneath there. Yeah, and here is just a collage of protests around the world. This is for all a lot of child protection systems, not only the Norwegian, but also in the US, for example, and in England, and yes. Oops. Okay, so I'm just gonna introduce the participants very quickly. We have June Thoburn. She is a professor emerita in social work from East Anglia University, England. We have Tarja Poso, professor at Tampere University in Finland, and also professor 2 at University of Bergen. We have Svanhild Alver. Svanhild is a social worker, and she has also been a manager of a local child protection agency, and she has over 30 years of experience. We have Geir Kjell Andersland, who was up here previously. He is a lawyer, and he has over 10 years experience from the Social County Board. We have Kenneth Burns, who is a college lecturer at Cork University College in Ireland. We have Thomas Mason, who is a director of the International Center for Socio-Legal Studies. And Marit Skivenes. will be on the side here. Yeah. I forgot to say that my name is Hege Helland, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Bergen. So, okay.
Over to me. Is that working?
No, I think we'll start with Svanhild.
All right.
Yeah.
And this one.
Okay. To this, I will have to say, it can be very difficult to work in Bergen, or even worse if you work in a smaller municipality at the countryside. When you are only one social worker, maybe two social workers, it can be very difficult if you are met with all this. When the global and the local newspaper are writing negative things about our services, we always have to evaluate what's going on. Is this? We have to talk to the social worker what was going on in this case, and they can also go to Fylkesmannen and complain. So it's very important that all complaints are taken care of, because we want to know what is in it. That's one important side of this. The other side is that when you are a social worker and you are in this very difficult decisions, you never should decide alone. You should decide together with somebody. And I think almost every decision is taken together with somebody else. And the most serious decisions, they are taken together. They are taken at Fylkesnemnda or in the court. When you are working and you are named in the newspaper, it can be very hard for you. And if your children are named, if you have children in the kindergarten, you can feel it very damaging for your family. And you can feel that your family is threatened. The consequences can be that you will be afraid. You can be freezing, you can flight, you can have attack, same time as everybody else who are afraid. And you will not do your job very well. So the consequences can be that the children in your community are not good enough taking care of the child welfare program. So it's very important that the social workers have a lot of social and emotional support. They have a supporting system, and that they have supporting employers and politicians, particular the locals. Yes. So that was the most important thing for me.
Okay. And then I want to hear from you, Gershel. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Fine. Okay, I make some points which can be discussed afterwards, maybe. But first of all, as a starting point, I would say that the child welfare system, or the child protection system, has always been under scrutiny from the first point. From the first day, it has always been a sort of criticism against this system. And I think that's why, because in a way this system has two phases. In Norway we talk about the Janus phase, because on the one hand the child welfare service is there to assist, to help people which need the help, both parents and children. And on the other hand, when the children, when the parent, for instance, will not give consent, or other reasons, the assistant measures wouldn't work, then the child welfare service has the opportunity to be coercive. And that's why many people today, instead of be fond of this service, which can help them, they are afraid of it. I mean, that's just a starting point, but I think that's a principle which is very, very important to bring further on. The other point I would make is that media, mass media, newspapers, television, what you like, has in its mandate, in a way, to protect the weak part. The media will always seek to find the weak part, and public authorities is by definition never a weak part. Public authorities are powerful, even if it's your service, and you can say you haven't the resources and all that, but still, in this case, you are regarded as a powerful service, and the media will seek for the weak one and make the stories or the impression from that point of view. Of course, this is very general speaking, but I think it's a point in what's happened now. And on the other hand, so far I think, but I have no statistics which is very accurate, but so far I think that there are more stories in the papers and in the mass media of all the bad this service do than all the good. It's a lot of good stories, many good stories, a lot of them. Or sometimes we can read about them, but very seldom. And so, just 2 more points, but this microphone is it's on. So I think that it's a paradox today that we have this enormous criticism, even international, against the Norwegian child service in a country, Norway, which we know, I mean, that's a fact, on the most spheres in these things, is on top of the list. The best country for people to live in, the best country for children to live in. That doesn't mean that we haven't something to be criticized for, but I mean, that's a paradox. And then I think that what the politicians should do today, and people working, the professionals working, is to find a sort of balanced view. That means that we have to recognize that there are improvements to be done. I think that people working with all respect in your service needs more education, 5 years instead of 3 years, just an example, and more knowledge about the multicultural new challenges, which we should recognize. Yes, we should do that. And then at the same time, I think politicians, especially politicians, because sometimes it's difficult for people working in this service to speak out because of confidentiality and all that. But I miss politicians in Norway going out and say, yes, we recognize some, not all, some of the criticism, but we are proud of having a public service. I can understand a lot of criticism, but I can't understand people who want to go back to the old days with no public responsibility for children in need.
Thank you, Thank you. June.
Let me see if I've...
Yeah.
Is that on?
Yeah.
No.
No, I don't.
That is, yeah. Okay. You think you've got problems in Norway who you've lived with. I started my social work career in the days of Maria Colwell, and we've had serious case review after serious case review, and we get it 3 times over. The press comes in when the crime is announced, a child found, whatever. Then they come in when the court hearing, and then they come in again when the serious case review is produced. So the same case we get 3 times over. So we're very used to this. But I agree with you. It has to be a balance. And I just there are 2 very. I'll leave these around actually. There's the story about Baby Peter, a really good book summarising the awfulness of what happened to the social worker in that case, and that was the politician Ed Balls, who some of you might watch on Come Dancing or whatever it is, who makes a fool of himself. But this is a rewrite of the. Oh, sorry, we're being videoed, aren't we? Cut that bit. The other one is a rewrite of the Colwell case, looking at priests. But But it's very complex. What is the media? The media is the people who write books, we academics. It is the courts, and it's the courts who've led on transparency. In England, it is the courts, and principally the family court president, Mumby, and now the new one, are both saying we must have transparency. So what do we mean by transparency? Publication of more of the judgments, anonymized. But the problem is, how do you anonymize to protect in a rural area? The judge in my area won't publish his judgment because of the identifiable possibilities. So, but some of the judges insist on publishing the name of the social worker, not the family, but the social worker. Also very controversial. So that's the courts. Then we've got, interestingly, the bloggers. We have a couple of excellent bloggers, one Suspicious Minds, the other one Transparency Project. I've left some leaflets there with the references if you want them. But the courts have just determined that the bloggers will be able to go into the courts. The legal bloggers, they must be legally qualified, but then and the blogs have become very important in this partnership, in getting this right. These are very serious bloggers. One of the main one being the Transparency Project, but the other key person, and then you've got the media. How does a family speak up? Because the family is not allowed to show anybody the court reports. How do they, the court report, their report, the report on them, they can't even show it to their mother. How do you...
Will they be punished if they do that?
Yes, yeah. So how do you say what you want to say, get your message out? You get it through Twitter. And the tweets have become very important. You get it through the media. Louise Tickle, The Guardian, writes for the Times as well, highly respectable. The state has a terrible secret. It kidnaps our children. So it's really rather important. The balance is absolutely right. At the moment, there's a debate between the British Association of Social Workers has asked this person and the other blogger to come and be involved in a training course for social workers. Others are saying, you can't possibly do that, you mustn't, what about the protection of the child? And there's an antithesis between the child's wish to privacy, etc., etc. So finally, just to really go back to what you said, one of the questions in the brief we got was, does mass media exposure create a mistrust in the system that poses a risk to children? But does poor child protection practice expose children to risk as well? And the public must be protected against poor practice as well as against inappropriate mass media publicity. And so it's quite right that we're all debating this. Okay. Finish there.
Tarja, can you maybe give us something from Finland?
Oj, var den?
From the Finnish perspective, I think on the very general level, I think all these shows how important media is in our societies, that our understanding of social problems and social issues is media mediated. And also I think it shows that child protection looks differently depending on the position in which you are. And in a way, like the pictures you showed us at the beginning, I can really believe that this is the child protection, how those people saw it, even though someone else would see the similar case differently. At home, we have waves of media discussion on child protection, and some people have tried to categorize them, the type of stories we hear. And the most common type of story is horror stories, which is about the mistakes and errors in the system. Most often they are told from the parent's point of view, that the system has treated the parents unfairly. or the nations. I mean, there has been this sort of recent trend that we hear more about the citizenship issues, that the child protection system shouldn't intervene if the child or family comes from Russia or Romania and so on, which is a very interesting new issue in these matters. But basically, horrors happen, and they happen for parents. But the other type of the story is the success stories, that child protection has come to help me. Child protection has rescued me. And most interestingly, these are mainly the children who tell their stories. And the third, but often we ignore these stories. I mean, I don't know about public in general, but we tend to think or recognize only the horror stories. And the third type of stories is the sort of crisis stories which propose solutions. Crisis on the somehow system level, that our system is not efficient enough. We look at outcome of children in the system and the resources spent on child protection, and then the media wants to see how we could solve these problems. And these solutions suggested in these media reports at the moment, they tend to focus on early intervention. And the latest issue is artificial intelligence. Just to let you know that we now think that would solve our child protection issues. Social media, how one sees it, it's very much on the horror story type. We can see the individual practitioners named, and we have also the list of municipalities which have most problems. We also have a list of researchers whose views one should be very critical of. So there's a variety, but I think the variety is my message, that the media is not just one. And as you already mentioned, it has a critical task, and it is very active in that matter. From the point of view of how to react on these media reports, one issue to add is from social work perspective. The Finnish social workers have created communities in which they want to develop the skills to work more in the media-related social work, and that's the heading under the heading of structural social work. So not speaking in individual matters, but these sort of social issues which are embedded in individual matters.
Yes. Thank you so much, Daria, for that. Thomas. Yes.
How about the mic? Would you give me yours? So otherwise I would talk to wrong way. Okay. Germany. In 2006, the young four-year-old boy Kevin was found in Bremen, the city of Bremen, in a refrigerator, killed by his stepfather, and this case was received and discussed a lot in media and so on. And the caseworker had several health issues, including alcohol. And this had a specialty. The child had a guardian by in the Youth Welfare Agency, appointed by the family court. And this guardian was responsible for over 240 children. So this led into a reform of law. Now it's in the law that a guardian full-time equivalent may only have a maximum of 50 children he's responsible for. And it led to reform to improve the family court measures and proceedings. That was real progress. This law, because of this media outcry, had partly problematic political messages going along, but in the meantime, we got over them. And that's an important part. The Ministry of Justice was credited for it, led by the Social Democratic Party. So the media and politics are in a relation here. And 2007, December 2007, a mother with mental ill health killed her 5 children. There was a reflex the Youth Welfare Office should have done and should have prevented that. There was no reason to it in the end. But there was, on December 19th, there was in a prime time talk show, Sunday evening, with the Ministry for Family Affairs of the Conservative Party. And she announced, I will do the best for child protection. So they were in the battle between the two parties in the coalition. Who's the one doing most for the protection of children? And she announced in that that she will have major changes coming on, and that she will get child protection workers off their desks and make them leave their desks and go to the families, finally. This was a major insult to caseworkers who went to the families every day. And the law that was introduced and the draft was, I would say, under-elaborated. And in the end, it failed in Parliament because of strong opposition of the child protection system and youth welfare system in Germany. Strong opposition, and it failed. This was a very interesting experience, how media and how to deal with media, and some conclusions we had out of it, and I wanted to introduce that, what we learned from that. First, that was a realization. There was a realization that the child and youth welfare system in Germany is very strong in society. It has more employees than the whole automobile industry in Germany, which is important in Germany. So, and we're stronger than, we're more than them, and we're important. So that was a very interesting realization. It was an empowerment. Then the self-empowerment. There was a nationwide initiative on child welfare officers, Jugendamt, the child protection statutory services. Help that reaches was the message. And they really promoted it and said, we're helping families and trying to prevent that they have to be separated. We'd separate if needed, but we're trying to help, and we're on your side and trying to help, and we're doing good for the society. So that was a strong initiative. And then we diligently and cautiously implemented a case review system, trying to avoid all the mistakes that have been made in the UK. And that's interesting, a development. In those high-profile cases, we have reviews, but not in a blaming way. So that's interesting, how to get to that point. And we had training on how to deal with media for the senior personnel in the youth welfare agencies, how to deal with media. There was training programs for them because they thought media was their enemy. It's well understandable, but not very helpful. And so how can we address that and bring our points across in those cases and teach them, because they were not employed because their competence with media. That's not why they got their position. So that was interesting. And now we try to spread knowledge. The Kinderschutzzentrum, Child Protection Centers, nationwide organization, they held seminars with TV screenwriters for crime movies and try to explain the situation of children. And when they bring up the topic, the situation of the children is much better reflected now in those movies, and the child protection services and the youth welfare system is much better reflected in society. It's much closer to reality. That's a very, and we're repeating to do that. That's a very interesting achievement. And many of the youth welfare officers or others opened their offices for documentaries with families and that, and to give society an insight what the work is all about and how difficult it is and what they're achieving. So a lot of things trying to empower oneself again after those serious incidents and reasonable critique. Still, the reflexes, if the child is found dead and the youth welfare office was involved, there's a reflex on blaming in society, but it's much less loud than it was before, and it's much more differentiated than before. They look into it, and that's good, and they should continue to do that, but not just in finding the one who is guilty, because that's always the child protection services. So that's much more differentiated, and I think that's a progress. We're still looking into it, but it's a progress we've made.
And then we have Kenneth. One more.
Okay, I'll promise to keep this brief. I think much has been said. Just very briefly to explain what happens in Ireland. We're in a period where the fourth estate or the mainstream media has never been more important. A well-run media which is balanced and fair is very important in a democracy to keep a check on democratic institutions, to expose practices that are not good. So everything I'm about to say is qualified by, that's very important. In Ireland, you don't have what you have in the UK of very strong vilification stories and the publication of social workers' names and faces on the news media. It happens rarely, but it is there. There's probably two parts to the media in Ireland. There is the campaigning journalism, which has done amazing work in promoting and pushing the government to respond to the needs of women, for example, and children in mother and baby homes. And that kind of campaigning journalism has had a huge impact. But then there is the other flip side of the media, which is to do with my colleagues in social work and child welfare would say that when a report comes out, and in Ireland we have governance inspection systems called like HICWA and others where there are neoliberal standards and indicators of good practice, and these organisations come in and check on these standards, are you doing well or not? And if an organisation is doing 95% well, the report will be about the 5% that is not going well. And in fairness to a lot of the journalists, it's the copy editors who write the headline is probably more of the issue than the journalists themselves. So the journalist is trying to be fair and balanced, but the person who writes the headline goes for the sensationalist. And this leads to an erosion of trust. It leads to an increase in fear. For the workers, then it impacts on their self-efficacy, because where is the valuing of their work? We had the new Ombudsman for Children at a conference last year in Cork. It was the National Child Protection Social Work Conference, and he's new to this area. So unlike he had a staff, and he asked the staff to do some research on media coverage of child protection in Ireland. And they spent, I think, 2 days looking, and they found no positive story at all. Zero, none, nada. I'm not sure what the Norwegian is for zero. And that was a surprise to him. Surprise to me also, which really, just to clarify, it's not a criticism of the media. I think that's a criticism of the profession, civil society groups, the Child Welfare Agency, for not seeding those stories, for not engaging with those stories, for not promoting those stories, because those stories are there. So I think the job of work in Ireland is very similar to other countries, is to start upskilling practitioners, managers and child welfare agencies to very positively engage with the media and stop seeing them maybe as, I'm not saying they see them as the enemy, but they have a challenging relationship with the media. And that needs to change. But this is the part where I need to check the exit door. I think we as academics and researchers are also complicit. I think the peer review process, which emphasizes very critical comments and maybe a focus on a more deficit approach, and maybe our research questions could be look at more positive stories, because what happens with our research is media read it. And they come and they say, tell us about this and you found that. So maybe unintentionally academics and researchers and how we write, and this came to my attention. I'm doing a book chapter for Morit and others, and when I finished the chapter, I noticed that unintentionally it looked like we were saying the system is not very good. And we had to very intentionally, as researchers, roll back and have a section that talked about all the positives and all the changes and the huge effort, blood, sweat and tears, money, laws, that has an advocacy that has happened to make the system very good. So maybe that's a question that we need to think about as researchers, and particularly when we're asked to be part of media commentary also. Because if practitioners are prohibited from talking about cases, and the people who know most often are excluded from the media, so therefore then sometimes it comes to us or civil society groups to make those comments. Lastly, in terms of social media coverage in Ireland of child and family welfare, Hege spoke about some Facebook pages. We have 2 Facebook pages that talk about TUSLA. The narrative is along the lines of faceless bureaucrats. They get money for taking children into care. The laws in Ireland are so lax that any social worker any day can decide to take any child. You know, those kind of stories. They're not very popular. I asked all the child welfare, a good number of the child welfare departments before I came. It wasn't really a theme for them. They couldn't point out any particular Facebook pages in particular. So there's no systematic, coordinated criticism. But what you have is very individual stories that come out, and they had no criticism of that, because if families felt that they needed to tell their story, then social media was one of the ways that they told their story, either through YouTube or podcasts or through Twitter pages. So they didn't necessarily see that as a very negative thing, even though it was critical. They had issues when they were identified maybe, or their family were affected. So just maybe one last point, which is that my question really is about what's the shape and character of debate now in civil society? And what I mean by that is what's being role modelled by leaders about how debates happens now? If this is a period of truth decay, if this is a period where there's the opinion of experts is undervalued, where commentators can comment without there being any factual basis on things that they're saying, there's a lack of humility maybe and Thomas mentioned it earlier in terms of when policymakers speak on behalf of organisations, are they fair and balanced? So there's never been a more important time to kind of think about debate and what it looks like and what it should be. And I'm finished on a positive note. Morit has a handout for you. Northern Ireland very recently began a conversation between civil society, social work, child welfare, and the media, and they produced a manual and guidelines to support the media on accurate, balanced, sensitive, and awareness and understanding improving media coverage of child welfare. I don't know what the impact of this has been, but what was positive is that the process happened, and that might be a template for other countries. Thank you.
Round of applause. Okay, so then we actually have some time for questions this time. I think we're gonna collect some questions and then you can answer. Is that okay? Yeah.
Work my up, så starten der. So thank you for a most interesting panel where I come in more or less as an interested and ignorant citizen. I came across this enormous criticism of Norwegian barnevernet very recently when I realized that a colleague who had applied for a job at the University of Bergen had decided to decline the job because of Norwegian barnevernet. So this was an academic. This is a smart person, you know, and it's not and he felt that with his Polish family values, they could be under threat by barnevernet. I have to me, that was mind-boggling. It's like, and then, so this is when I started wondering what's going on, and why is Norwegian barnevernet portrayed that way internationally? And so So this has led me to two questions, and I am in this lucky position to have this in a panel that can tell me these things. First of all, is this one of the times when maybe Donald Trump's favorite term is correct? Is there fake news? So are there actually sort of news troll agencies out there